Welcome to the Men Unplugged Show. Get ready to plug in and recharge your life, family, and career while igniting your faith in Christ. Now, here's your host and champion of helping men live with passion and purpose, Jeff Jarina.
Hey, how's it going? Jeff Jarina here, and welcome to episode 28 of the Men Unplugged Show. Are you ready to take the next step in finding and living your true purpose in life? Go to menunplug.net, click on any button that says Stay Informed, and I'll send you a free PDF copy of my book, 10 Steps to Power and Purpose. Now let's chat with today's featured guest, Brian Housman. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here with you and your listeners today, Jeff.
Hey, are you ready to help men plug in and recharge?
Absolutely.
Hey,
Let's go.
I love that response, man. Awesome. Brian is the author of 4 books, and most of these books primarily deal with social media and how to navigate around this oftentimes confusing technology as a parent. And currently, he serves as the executive director at 360 Family. Brian, take about a minute or two, fill in the gaps there from that intro, and a little bit about your personal life.
Yeah, so I was a youth pastor for about 13 years. I was on staff at a couple different churches, and then I was a school administrator. I was the spiritual life director at a private Christian school. And then my wife and I, for 5 years, helped to run a Christian camp up in Northwest Arkansas. And so we've always had our fingers in a lot of different pots, so to speak, working with teenagers and kids, families, from out in the woods to at a school to at church. And through that experience, I ended up resigning from my job about 14 years ago, and we launched 360 Family. And so now I get the privilege of being able to travel and write full time. And it's been just a very humbling experience. All the places we've gone to 45 states and 11 different countries now, and the Lord just continues to give opportunities unexpectedly.
Well, I'll tell you what you're doing, Brian, is so needed in the body of Christ right now. I mean, I was telling you on the phone here earlier that this was one of the first podcast episodes that I wanted to do on this show because I feel like it's such a need. I mean, there's just so much stuff that we as parents don't get about social media.
I couldn't agree more, Jeff. I think social media technology is one of those issues that we assume that we know because, we were all grew up as teenagers back in the Walkman,
Right.
We were days and we were right on the cusp of when CDs were being launched. And and part of just our arrogance as grownups is we think that we know the answers to this stuff. And the reality is technology has allowed our children to create double and triple lives. And the way that they use it, how much they use it, who they're connect with when they use it, is stuff that is largely foreign to us as grown-ups.
Well, on that note, my wife and I, our 2 kids, they're not in their teenage years right now. However, our daughter, who's like 7 years old, since the age of 2, she's just been able to point and click and navigate around an iPad or iPhone just almost inherently. And I guess I equate that to back in the day with an Atari 2600 or, like you said, a Walkman or even, how about the boombox, something like that. And your book, Tech Savvy Parenting, you mentioned that when you published this book, that this is when everything just exploded in a good way. And so talk a little bit about this book and more particular, how you got into doing this to begin with.
Yeah, so honestly, I as a writer, I try to find subjects to write about that I don't see other people writing about. And I had a workshop that was called Culture Shock that was kind of a state of the address of adolescent culture. And I had done it hundreds of times around the country. And I began to notice that more and more the questions that parents were asking about their teenagers and children's culture was specifically about technology. And I couldn't find a book on the Christian market specifically about technology, being addressed from a biblical worldview. And so just began to spend about 2 years doing research and was able to, and I'm very tech illiterate. I love technology, and so it just came very easily to me to be able to put together the book. And then the other reason is, again, I felt like it was one of those issues that we as parents, we think that we understand, and we really don't. I mean, I can't say that strongly enough. We really do not understand the technological lives of our kids. And like you mentioned, your daughter, and at the age of 2, that you felt like that she understood an iPad. And, I would describe it as it's almost as if like the doctor cut the umbilical cord and attached a Wi-Fi cable, to our kids when they
Oh,
were
wow.
born.
That's a good way.
Because they've always been wired. There's not a day of your daughter's life that she didn't know what it meant to be wired. And so this stuff becomes very intuitive to them. Whereas to us, it's something that we have to constantly integrate into our life. We have to figure out how do we make the next thing fit. Whereas for them, they can go to Best Buy and pick up a video game controller that's on display and begin to play a game that they've never played before and just excel at it because they just intuitively know what to do. That they can pick up a brand new smartphone, a new tablet that they've never used before, have never even seen it, and they just intuitively know what to do with it. Whereas for us, we're going, okay, where do I push to get this thing started? And so I think partly we as grown-ups have got to admit, we have to start where we are and admit that we don't have the answers. Instead of living this lie that, oh, I think I know what's going on with my kid, and largely we don't.
From your own experience, what are some things that we as parents, and right now, Men Unplugged Show, as men, what can we do to really understand this more so that we can protect our kids?
I think one of the biggest things, and this is not just with technology, but it's with all of parenting, and it's the word intentional. That you've got to be intentional with your time with your kids, and intentional in connecting with them on technology. That meaning that if you're going to allow your teen, your preteen to be on social media, then you definitely should be on that same social media. So that it's not just for accountability, but it's also to communicate to your child that we do life together. And so, like when my kids both got onto social media at the age of 13, because that's when you're legally allowed to be on it. So when they both got on social media at the age of 13, the first person they connected with was my wife and myself, so that they could see that just as we've done life together throughout all of your life, we're going to continue to do life together online. And so I think in many ways, technology has become one of those things that divides the generations because it's one of the things that they do better than we do. And so in their mind as kids, hey, this is my world, that you're not really welcome to be a part of it. But if you can lay that foundation in your child's life when they're young, that we do life together all the time, so that when they grow up and they become, preteens and they begin to make friends on their own, they don't have to go through that angsty middle school phase of, yeah, my dad just doesn't get me. My parents don't understand me, so I'll just connect with people online instead. Because if you lay that foundation that I'm intentionally going to connect with you every day, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, then it's going to pay off dividends once they get to middle school and high school. And that dividend is going to be trust, that they're going to trust you to be part of those areas of their life, whether it's their technological lives or their dating life or their spiritual life, that they're going to welcome you into those pieces.
So what have you found here in your research that really tell us the state of social media, this digital age, and what can happen if we don't get a grasp on it as fathers?
Yeah, like some of the things we know now is 1 out of 4 of all guys, adolescent boys, 1 out of 4 of all girls, 1 out of 5 of all guys admit to sending and receiving nude photos of themselves or other people on social media. Over 40% of them admit to having sexual conversations with people on social media. 1 out of 4 of them are having sexual conversations with complete strangers. 12% of kids set up a face-to-face meeting with this stranger. And so, again, we as parents, I think we assume because we told our kids when they were 5, don't talk to strangers, that one conversation is gonna somehow make an impact. But yet more than 1 out of 10 of them are setting up face-to-face meetings with someone that they've had an intimate sexual conversation with online. And I
Mm.
think in many ways, as parents, as dads, we still see our 14-year-old sons as boys playing with Legos and our daughters with playing with Barbie dolls. Yet by the time they get to be 11, man, they're making some real world decisions with real world consequences. And so we've got to begin to have these conversations with them younger than we think.
These numbers that you just talked about, Brian, to me, tell me the state of where we're at with social media and the digital world and what we need to do here as dads. I know you're not coming at it here from a scare tactic, but it's more of to give you guys a warning that we really got to get engaged with our kids on this social media. And, having a 7-year-old daughter, we haven't hit that point yet. But for your work with parents that have teenagers, give me something very simple that they can do, that they can say, you know what, I'm going to do this once a week with my kids. What is that they can do right now?
Okay, actually, I mean, I'm going to have to give you more than one. One, I would say, is the biggest complaint I hear from parents concerning their teen and tweens social media is that my kid is always on their phone. My kid is always on their devices. They've always got a screen in front of them. And so I would just encourage you to allow some time during the day for quietness. Give your kid permission to unplug. We know from different sociological studies from teenagers themselves that they say that they feel pressure to always be connected. Like they feel this unspoken pressure from their friends, from other people to always be on, quote unquote. And so when you just give your child permission that, hey, you know what, it's okay that you can turn your phone off for a few minutes. You don't have to be looking at that right now. That my daughter, so she learned when she gets home from school, she would take a few minutes to jump on Instagram and get connected with her friends that she haven't seen all day. And then after about 15 minutes, she'd turn it off. I mean, like just turn her phone off so she could have some quietness to focus on her studies. And she just realized that when she did that, it just the amount of mental health that it brought to her life to disengage was remarkable. And then the same thing, we decided to make all of our family time is technology free. So when we sit down at the dinner table or we go out to eat someplace together as a family, that everyone has their phones, in their pockets or turned off, that no one can bring their screens to the dinner table. I mean, we don't even bring them in our pockets, just everyone leaves them because, the average meal lasts 12 minutes. And in 12 minutes, we can have the possibility of a conversation if we don't have screens in front of us. And the place that starts, though, dads, is it starts with us. Is that we've got to be willing to set those things aside first so that we can model to our kids what right relationships look like. And that if you're talking with your kid in the car and that, they're deciding to have a vulnerable moment with you and actually share what was happening at school today. And then all of a sudden your cell phone rings and you say, hey, hang on just 1 second, sweetie, let me get this real quick. I don't know another way to say it other than I believe you just dishonored your kid. Because you are saying to them without words that this thing in your hand is more important than that living, breathing relationship sitting next to you. And, there's times that my kids will come to me and I'll be in my home office working and my son will come home from his classes at college and say, hey, Dad, let me tell you what happened today at school. And I'm staring at my laptop. And then he'll go, okay, I'll just come back later, okay? And oh, man, it's like a gut check. To go, oh, wait a minute, Bailey, please come back. And I'll just close my laptop and say, hey, I'm sorry. Nothing is more important right now than you. Tell me about your day. Because I know he just needs like 3 minutes. It's not like he needs an hour. He just wants 3 minutes to tell me about his day. And that 3 minute of investment of closing my laptop is going to pay dividends in the future. And so I would just encourage you, as a dad, as a parent, to be willing to close the laptop, turn off the phone for a few minutes to engage with your kids. The other one is to you mentioned that my heartbeat is not fear. That I don't want to create a posture of fear. I want to create a posture of possibility. That there's a possibility that I can have a right relationship with my kid. There's a possibility that I can actually connect with them, with my eyes, with my hands, without a screen today. And so I say that to you to say that maybe this week that you can use technology to connect with your kid in a positive way. That instead of your kid getting a phone call from you and them go on the other end going, "Oh, great, what does Dad want now?" Because they're going to assume that every time Dad calls, it's to, from their
Right.
perspective, harass me about something. But instead, maybe you just send your kid a positive text message that, "Hey man, I was thinking about you while you're in class today, and was just reminded what a blessing you are to my life." And your kid's going to be like, "Okay, what does Dad want now?"
Right.
But just get used to that. And at least once a week, connecting in a positive way with your kid through your screen.
Well, I tell you what, there were some valuable tips right there. You were just dropping value bombs left and right. The one that got me, convicted me was, I find that so often my daughter will come in and I'll be editing some podcast or trying to do some show notes, do some research, whatever, and she'll want to talk, and I'll say not right now, and then she turns away, and I can't say any other way. Then she just feels rejected.
Yeah, I'm telling you, and what she'll learn, Jeff, and this is not to put you on the spot, bro, but what she will learn after so many times of saying not right now is that anytime I do see Dad in his office, that means I'm not welcome. And I know that's the last thing that you want is to communicate that, hey, there's a part of our house that is closed off to my child, that you're not welcome to be a part of. And so, the same thing happens that whether you're a dad who's in the car, and when you're in the car, you feel like, hey, that's my time to listen to podcasts or listen to the radio. And so, hey, don't talk to me right now. Or, it could be that when you're at work, and if every time that your kid tries to call you at work, you send them an auto text back that says, "I can't talk right now, I'll call you back later."
Yeah.
Well, then, they begin to learn that, oh, well, this part of my dad's life, I'm not welcome to be a part of. And so as much as possible, we always want to create an arms open environment with our kids. And I know there's always going to be exceptions. There's going to be times that, your kid has to learn that there are some times that you're not available. But as often as possible, I want to be a parent that says yes. And not just yes in this moment, like, yes, you can come into my office right now, but I mean, yes, at all times. There's every once in a while I'll be in the car with my daughter and she's a little more spontaneous than my son. And sometimes, I'll pick her up from school and we'll be driving around, run some errands, and she'll go, "Man, I would love to get a smoothie from Panera right now." And part of me is thinking, man, I don't want to spend $5 on a smoothie, an overpriced smoothie.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
But then my response is yes, because I know if I get a smoothie, that means we're going to go inside, and she knows this, that if I buy a smoothie, we're going to sit down for 20 minutes, and drink it together. And that gives me the possibility of having a conversation in those 20 minutes, because now she feels like her defenses are down. She's kind of in her element. She's in her environment. And so, man, if I had $5 for the possibility of having a conversation, man, I'll pay that every day. That's way better for me than another movie at the Red Box, So again, just look for opportunities as a dad to say yes to your kids.
Well, I'll tell you what, to your point there, if you disengage, and I'm just thinking this out loud here, it makes sense to me. If you disengage from your kids and you're doing your own thing in the digital world, wouldn't they do the same thing in social media?
Yes. They began to learn that my parents have their life and I have my life, and my life is online. And if we as parents, if we're not engaging with them in technology and creating reasonable boundaries, which means that our kids have to know that it can't be the wild, wild west when it comes to technology in our home, that we're all going to live life out in the open. I've told my children that Matthew 5:14 says that we are the light of the world. A light is not meant to be put under a bushel. It means that our light shines at all times. And so if we are light, that means a light lives out in the open. So we're going to live out in the open with each other when it comes to technology. That God created community. And community means that we live out, we engage one another. And so God's first community was family. So that means we're not going to use screens to isolate ourselves from each other. We're going to live out in the open, connect with each other. And so one of the things I do with my kids is that periodically I'll come to them and just say, "Hey, I need to see your phone." And they know that if I ask to see their phone, it's not because I'm trying to get up them in their business. It's not because I'm trying to be intimidating. I'm not trying to pull the authority card. It's because I desire for us to live in right relationship. And it's reasonable to expect that we all have boundaries in our life, that we all have accountability. And so I've communicated to my children, I have accountability. I have a board of directors that have access to my life. I have your mom that has access to my life. I have two best friends that have online accountability with them. And so in the same way as my child, that you're going to have accountability with me. And so when I ask to see their phones, I usually it's less than 5 minutes. It doesn't have to take all day. The typical teenager spends 2 hours a day, every day on social media, 10 hours a day, every day plugged into technology.
Man.
So there's no way, the average dad spends 4.5 minutes a day in quality conversation with his kids. Now, I mean, just let that sink in. 4.5 minutes compared to 2 hours or 10 hours. There's no way. I mean, if you're wanting to make this into a battle, this is an unwinnable war. And so, now for me, the objective is not, well, then I'm going to spend 2 hours a day, or I'm going to spend 8 hours a day. That's just not reasonable. That's not a logic. That's never going to happen because you have a career and you have other responsibilities. But when I do spend time, man, I'm going to be all in. And I can't do this in 4.5 minutes, which means I'm going to have to be intentional at the time I spend with my kids. So anyway, back to the phones. I usually take about 5 minutes to look at their phone because I don't need to see every single text message, every single conversation. I'm just trying to create reasonable accountability so that whenever I ask to see the phone, they need to give it to me immediately. And then I'm going to flip through some of their text messages. I'm going to flip through their social media. And because they don't know when I'm going to ask, then it kind of keeps their guard up,
Right.
to, I better be ready because dad may ask to see my phone tonight, kind of a thing.
And I've heard
And then I usually ask a couple of questions so that if I'm looking at my daughter's, Instagram, that I may just say, "Hey, how do you know this girl?" Or where did you meet this guy? As I'm looking at their pictures, because I'm just looking for the story, because life is all about stories. And, if the response is, "Well, she's in my cheerleading squad at school." Oh, okay. Well, that's a great answer. Or if the answer is, "Oh, you remember last summer when we went to church camp in Ohio and there was this group there from Kentucky, and so I connected with this guy and he has a friend from Chicago and that's him."
Wow.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is you don't know him in the real world. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and delete him. Okay. And that's a true story.
Right.
It's because, I communicate with my kids that let's connect with people online that we know in the real world.
That you met
Because
face
if you
to
don't know
face.
them in the real world, then you don't have a possibility of knowing that this person is legit who they say they are.
Wow, that is big right there. It really is. I mean, you got to be saying, look, if you're going to be friends with somebody, you have to at least have a face-to-face encounter with that individual.
Oh, absolutely. Because our children don't have the real world experience to always know is someone who they say they are online. And the only way to know that is by meeting them yourself. I was called to a Christian school last year to come do a presentation because they had a 10th grade boy that had connected with a 19-year-old girl from Oklahoma City on Instagram. And she's a beautiful girl, a beautiful young woman. And so they start this online relationship.
Mm.
And over the course of a couple of weeks, it turns into sending semi-nude photos back and forth to each other.
Oh, man.
And then after a number of times of doing this, it turned into full nude photos back and forth to each other.
Oh, man.
Then it developed into videos. Well,
Mm.
then the boy starts feeling uncomfortable making these videos of himself, so he breaks off the relationship. Well, then she begins to send him messages saying, "Hey, like, where did you go? And what happened? And I love talking with you." And then she sends him a threatening message that says, "If you don't keep talking to me, I'm going to take all these pictures of you and I'm going to put them on my Instagram."
Oh,
Well,
man.
what he didn't know was that, and again, this is just our kids don't understand They're not always thinking logically about how connections are made.
Right.
So, Jeff, if you and I are connected on Instagram, that means I can see your follower list, your friend list, so that if I tag you in something, then anybody that follows you, they can see that, even though it wasn't sent to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Unfortunately, it does.
yes. So that what happened was she went and followed, she could see his list. So she went and followed all the other guys at his school also and created relationships with them. So then one day he's walking into school and about four of his buddies pull him aside and said, "Dude, have you seen your Instagram this morning?" So he opens up his Instagram and she had posted all these new pictures of him on her page and just tagged him in the pictures so that anybody that he was followers with, they could see the pictures.
Oh man,
Of course,
what a
now
shame.
he's 15 years old. He's mortified that these pictures that he thought, hey, I love you, you love me, I trust you, you trust me. Well, now they're posted online. So then they got to get they've got to get the authorities involved, and they're calling the police. They have to call the FBI. They have to call contact FBI contacts Instagram. They have to contact the internet service provider. They're having to do all this legwork. They have to go to court and get a court order to get permission to find out who owns that profile. And then after about 8 days of all this, of his pictures being online, then they find out it's not a beautiful 19-year-old girl. It's a 24-year-old man.
Oh,
Because just because someone is online and looks like a beautiful 17-year-old or 19-year-old doesn't mean it's legit.
right.
And so especially our sons, who are, as men, this, we are visually driven, and if we're on a website and we could just be flipping through our own Twitter feed and we're flipping through all of our sports stuff and our hunting stuff and car stuff. And then all of a sudden there's a picture of a woman laid out on the front end of a car. And immediately the enemy has got our attention, and so before you know it, we're clicking on it. And man, I wonder what this profile is all about. Now we're clicking on the profile, and that leads to her profile. Then that leads to a link that says, "Here's a link to my nude photos." So that and it becomes this rabbit trail. And Jeff, I know personally how this happens and how the enemy gets a foothold in our lives, into the lives of our sons, is it starts off with something that may look provocative on the front end of a car, and the next thing you know, you're on a website with fully nude photos inviting you to look at her video library.
I'll tell you what, it is scary, scary stuff, Brian. And one of my guests was Steve Arterburn, who wrote the book Every Man's Battle. And that was a great show that day. And we have one of our partners, for internet accountability, Covenant Eyes. So guys, I know you hear about this on a lot of episodes, but I'm going to say it right now because I think it's fitting for what Brian said. When you sign up, whether it's an individual or family plan through menunplug.net, using that promo code menunplugged, you're going to get your first month free. I can't tell you any other way than to protect yourself on the internet than that. It's the ultimate shield. Hey guys, since we're talking about protecting our kids and ourselves on social media, here's that link to Covenant Eyes to protect you and your family today. Go to the resources page at menunplugged.net and click on that Covenant Eyes logo. Sign up for an individual or family plan. Use promo code menunplugged and get your first month free. Here's another way to do it. Go to menunplugged.net/eyes. That's EYES. Do the same thing. Sign up for an individual or family plan and get your first month free when you use promo code menunplugged. Brian, this is a lot of great information here. We could keep going on with this, but I really want to hit the Supercharged Round right now. Couple questions for you. You ready to hit it?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. Tell us how you came to know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior.
Well, I grew up in church, like I'm sure a lot of your listeners did. And so I had heard the gospel ad nauseum, as a kid, but it was when I was 13 years old that it finally clicked for me. And I remember on a Sunday night listening to someone else at church share their testimony about how they grew up in church, and that when they were a teenager, it finally made sense to them that they had never asked Jesus to be their Savior. And I was sitting there and I thought, oh my gosh, that's my life. That's my story. And right then I just said, Jesus, as best as I know how, I'm going to give you my life. And I want you to come in and you make me new. But then, like most teenagers, even in church, it's hard for faith to be concrete. It's hard for faith to be your own when you're a teenager. And so I would say is when I was 19 years old and I was in a college class, I was going to a Bible college, and I was taking a class on the book of Romans, and the teacher was talking about grace. And I don't know if maybe I was just sleeping every time our pastor talked about it or what, but I was oblivious. I had no idea what he was talking about. And all of a sudden, he starts talking about what grace is and God's unconditional acceptance of us because of what Christ has done on the cross. I got up out of my chair and went to the back of the classroom and laid on the floor in a fetal position and just wept. I was just so overwhelmed that God would just love me and receive me. And it was like a watershed moment in my life. And I know that I gave my life to Christ when I was 13, but I feel like I gave him my whole heart when I was 19, that it was mine. Like I owned it. Like this is my relationship, my walk with Christ. And I would say that really for me, that's when everything changed, is when I began to believe that God, I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to earn anything with you. I don't have to change anything with you. I don't have to pony up, ante up, anything else. You just want me for me. And that the more I gave him me, the more he was able to redeem those hidden parts of my life. And it's been a very humbling experience now, Jeff, raising two teenagers and seeing them go through that same experience now. My daughter and I just had a conversation the other night at 1:00 in the morning, of all things, sitting at the dinner table, talking about some sin in her life, and me just sharing with her about how God had to take me through this refining process as a married man of a gut-wrenching process of pulling sin out of my life, and how humiliating that is for other people to see your sin. Just how shameful that can feel. And yet that when if he is the one pulling it out, it's because he's got something much better he wants to replace that sin with. And so it's just been fun for me as a dad, creating this relationship with my children, where as I walk in humility and I walk in transparency, I'm seeing it come back to me in my relationship with my children as they choose to do the same thing.
Hey, praise the Lord for your salvation. And you talked about grace. When you understand grace, when you can get it in its full entirety, what Christ gave up for us. I mean, he gave up his life for us. When you
man, it's the game changer, isn't it?
Oh, it's so. I mean,
I equate it to like a football game, and they have those games where the wind is just howling, and the rain is just pouring down, and it just becomes like a mud fest on the field. It's just like a slug,
right.
of a game and you feel like no matter what you do, you just can't advance the ball forward. You try to come up with the trick plays, you put your running back in. It doesn't matter. It's like you just can't get the ball moving forward. And I feel like so often that's what the Christian life is like. You just feel like you're going nowhere. And then, man, all of a sudden grace shows up.
It's, I look at it like this. I was teaching on something one day. I think I don't know what it was about, some Bible study or something. And I had brought a bag of chains. I went and bought them at the hardware store and put them in this bag. And it was like 50 to 75 pounds. I mean, this thing was heavy. I actually had to reinforce it. And I took it in there and I gave this illustration. I said, look, guys, I want everybody to pass these chains around. And they're passing around. I mean, they're lifting. I mean, you could see their muscles flexing, right? Having to lift these chains up. And I said, that was how we were before we knew Christ with our sin. We were shackled by all those chains. Imagine those around you. And they were just looking at me like, I get your point. And I said, now put it down. That is what Christ did for us. He took the chains off. We're unplugged. We're unchained. That's what we are as believers in Jesus Christ. And I love that. I really do. Hey, you and I could keep preaching about this forever here. So next question here. Was there a failure or something like that? Maybe you got this big failure in your life that you'd like to chat about and that you learned from, like a lesson that you could pass on?
Yeah, I've shared this story many times at different conferences and with other uh, groups of dads, and it's that 14 years ago, when I was a much younger pastor, I had gotten to the place where I felt like that if I wanted to achieve more, then I needed to do more. And I'm sure that can resonate with any dad out there, regardless if you're a truck driver, if you are a mechanic, or if you're a dentist. That we are our culture is set up in such a way that we think that if I do more, if I commit more to work, then I'll achieve more. I'll be rewarded more. I'll get a higher raise. I can move up the ladder, whatever it is. And so we were in an unhealthy situation with a church that was kind of falling apart with some leadership issues. And so I began to take on, hey, I'll do the middle school and high school ministry. And then it was, hey, I'll take on the college ministry. Hey, I'll start teaching. I'll do the young adult ministry, and then I'll start team teaching on Sunday mornings. And so basically, I just began to take on more and more responsibilities. And the more responsibilities I took on, sure enough, I was rewarded more. With more of a raise, financially, and with more accolades from people in the church. Oh wow, you were so gifted, man! You were so talented. Oh, I don't know what our church would do without you. I mean, all these things that really what happens is guys, maybe for women too, but especially for guys, the enemy just uses it to exploit the worst parts of ourself. And so all of a sudden, what God meant to be a good thing becomes very much a fleshly thing, is I start believing my own hype. And before you know it, it leads to a season of really poor margins and boundaries in my life. Without going into too much detail, it became such a thing that it very well could have destroyed not just my ministry, but it could have destroyed my marriage, my relationship. And because of some choices that I made during that season, it led to some loss of opportunities and the loss of my reputation with some people, the loss of future possibilities, the loss of my dignity. And it was just a very painful, we called it our dark night of the soul, just a season of just darkness, in our family. And I remember very much, I feel like that we will never appreciate grace. You can't appreciate grace until you understand the extent of the possibilities of destruction of your own sin. And so I remember going through this whole season, and I took 3 months where I quit my job at the church, and we took 3 months and did nothing. Like no work. I didn't create anything, produce anything, manufacture anything, just 3 months just to be still and quiet. I just needed to recalibrate my life. And during that season of God just pulling all the sin out of my life, one night it just finally hit me. And I was laying on our bed in the bedroom by myself and just began to, when I say sob, I was just weeping as God just began to just put this weight on me of, you could have destroyed everything. And my wife walked in and saw me crying and just sat on the bed next to me and picked up my head and set my head in her lap. And she didn't say a word. She just received me. And I remember in that moment of me just feeling vulnerable, of her just receiving me, God just saying, Brian, this is what grace is. Is every day I take your sin, and because of what my son did on the cross, I still receive you. And man, it was a game changer for us and for me, and so now I live every day. And if we don't, as men, live with this reality, man, you can easily blow it. Blow everything. Is I live with the reality that I am one sin away from destroying my marriage. I'm one choice away from ruining my trust with my children.
Mm.
And because we have hearts of arrogance as men, that we think that we are insurmountable. We think that we are indestructible. And so sometimes that leads us into places in our heart that we think, hey man, I've earned this. I deserve this. Hey, you know what? I've been faithful to my wife. I deserve some fun.
Mm.
Hey, I provide for my family. It's just a website. It's no big deal. And so we begin to tinker into places of darkness that we were not created to live as men of light.
Mm.
And when we walk just a little bit into darkness and we invoke that just clause, which is, hey, just this one time. Hey, man, just this one website, just this one person, just this one lunch.
Mm.
Then it becomes easier and easier to invoke that just clause, again and again and again, until before you know it, man, you are lost in the woods and can't find the way home. And so I say that not to preach at you guys. I'm really speaking it to myself as a reminder that I've got to every day live with that reality that sin has consequences.
Invaluable wisdom right there. And thank you, brother, right there, for just being open and honest and bearing out your soul right here to all these listeners. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do that. I tell guys all the time, look, if you can't open up to another man in Christ, then you know what? You're not really being courageous. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of courage to go, I don't know, do something that, to run with the bulls in Pamplona. I guess it does. But to me, it takes more courage to sit there and bare your soul to another man and say, look, dude, this is where I fail. These are my problems. This is what I need help with. And you know what? I'm jacked up. I mean, we're all jacked up, right, Brian? We are.
Absolutely.
But you know what? The cross makes us whole. And you talked about grace, talked about all that stuff. Romans 8:1. There's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And it sounds like to me you got caught up in the performance trap, sense of entitlement, which I know I have, and I know a lot of guys have. You talked about your biggest failure. Now I just want you to take about probably 30 to 60 seconds, talk about your greatest success so far.
Honestly, if I was going to say that I am ever prideful about something, and I don't mean prideful, I mean in a godly way, it's when I look at the investment of time that my wife and I have put into my kids, and the reward that has come out of that. And my son just last week, he comes home from school and he was like, "Dad, let me tell you about this conversation I had today." He said, "I was sitting in the commons, in between classes, and one of the guys that was in my previous class came up and was asking me if I had some notes that he missed." And so we're sitting there going over the notes. And as he's looking at my notes, he was reading some personal comments I was making about things the professor was saying. And they were out of his faith. And it's a sociology class. And then the guy says, "Oh, is that something important to you?" And so Bailey goes, so I had a chance to sit there and share my testimony with him and share my faith with him.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, instead of him calling his 20-year-old friend from church and telling him this, he came home and told Dad this.
That's big.
And I'm like, man, that is a win right there. I love that we don't have a relationship that's based on authority, but instead we have this relationship that's based on me really being more of a mentor in his life and us being on this spiritual journey together. And I mean, if there's anything I get jacked up about, man, it's being able to have these conversations that our kids just want to initiate with my wife and I about what God's doing in their life. But that doesn't happen by accident, man. That happens through, like right now, with your own 7-year-old and your own 6-month-old Jeff, is just making choices every single day to invest. And just like that retirement account, 40 years from now, it's going to pay off dividends. The same thing's going to happen with your kids by the time they get to be 14 and 18.
I'll tell you what, that word that hit me so hard right there was the word invest. Invest with your kids. And, so often as men, we want to invest in our careers. We want to invest in, like you said, the stock market. But oftentimes we find it difficult to really invest with our kids, with our families. So you know what? I really am glad that you mentioned that, because that was another valuable. You keep dropping these things, man, left and right. Come on. Let's go. Wow, this is crazy. Okay. I know your time is precious here, so I'm going to ask you 2 more questions here.
Yeah.
Outside of the Bible, what is one book that you'd recommend and why?
Woo, that is a great question.
One book.
Yeah, so I love mountaineering. We're big outdoors people in our family. We do a lot of rock climbing, backpacking, kayaking, hiking, everything. And probably one of my all-time favorite books is called Into Thin Air, and it's written by John Krakauer, Krakauer. It's an odd last name, Into Thin Air, and it's a true story about he was hired by outside magazine to go and write about some ecological stuff happening on Mount Everest. So he's going there as a reporter, but he's climbed quite a few of these 7,000 meter mountains himself. So he gets there, and as he's there as a reporter, one of the guides ends up inviting him to go and climb because they knows that he can. And so he ends up being on this group of 11 that's climbing the mountain. And what happens is there's this perfect storm of like 2 different storm fronts that came in, and it becomes the deadliest day in history on Mount Everest. But it's a true story about all these people that end up dying that day from several different groups. And that's not why it's intriguing. Really, the intriguing thing is you see the consequences of little choices. Micro choices. And how these little choices that they made of like not carrying 1 extra canister of oxygen that day, or choosing not to, on this 500 meter stretch, to not hook in to a safety person, like how these little choices came back to haunt them. And for me, I've read the book 3 times, and every time I read it, for me, I'm not looking at it in terms of, okay, how am I going to climb Mount Everest differently myself? Because I have no hopes of ever climbing Mount Everest. Honestly, I look at it in terms of a story of manhood, and how even though tragedy stuck in their life, that I've got to count the cost every day in my own life and the little choices that I make. So it's called Into Thin Air. You should go get it, read it. It's very provocative.
I'm definitely going to check that out. Hey, I'm going to put that on the show notes there. Okay, last question is this. Give us one parting tip of wisdom.
Yeah, so one last parting tip of wisdom, I would say, is that you're never going to make it on your own. Whether as in your marriage or your career, in a church, the Christian life was never meant to be lived alone. And unless, even if you're a sole proprietor and you've got your own business going, like maybe you do, Jeff, and I do, that I recognize that I cannot do this by myself. I've got to have community around with me. I've got to have a spouse that I'm willing to be transparent with. I got 2 buddies that are other pastors that, man, they know everything. They know legit everything that I've gone through. And because I know that they're going to still receive me, they're going to ask me the hard questions. And whether that's in your career, in terms of being willing to be humble enough to seek out those that are further along from you and get advice from them, or from a friend that you're going to have accountability with, that you've got to have a community of people around you if you're going to make it through this. Now, if you want to connect with me, our ministry is called 360 Family. And you can find me on our website at 360family.org. That's 360family.org. Or on our secondary site, which is techsavvyparenting.com. Techsavvyparenting.com. You can also find me on social media. You can just find me under Brian Housman. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those places. My Twitter feed is BWHOUSMAN. And if you follow me on social media, you'll never find out about what I had for lunch, or what celebrity I met today, or anything like that, because I only talk about parenting tips. And so, we'd love to connect with you on social media.
Brian, thank you so much for being on the show. There was so much information in here, and I'm really glad that I finally got you on the show.
Yeah, it was a blessing being here with you and with your listeners, Jeff.
Well, that wraps up my time with today's guest, Brian Housman. I hope you guys were encouraged and equipped to protect your kids, family, and yourself in this digital age that we live in today. Keep plugged in and charging forward as we have some key resources for you, along with today's show notes, which include links to those books that Brian mentioned on today's podcast, and a direct link to that Covenant Eyes free month offer for you or your family using promo code Men Unplugged. And if you can't access the show notes, go to menunplugged.net/eyes. That's EYES. Use that promo code Men Unplugged and get your first month free. Just type Brian in the search bar on our website, and everything we spoke about will be there. Until next time, stay plugged in and recharged. God bless.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. There's plenty more to see at menunplug.net, including key resources and ways to engage with Jeff in his training and speaking forums. While there, don't forget to subscribe and receive a free gift. We look forward to you joining us next time here on the Men Unplugged Show.